I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 110 of EO Radio Show. This is our 18th in a series of quick tip episodes focusing on the details of state registration of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. Other episodes have focused on state filings in Nevada, Arizona, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, Hawaii, New York and New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, Vermont, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma and Texas, New Mexico and Utah, Colorado and Wyoming, Washington, D.C., Michigan and Ohio, and last month, Illinois and Indiana. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Wisconsin and Minnesota. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there's a playlist just for the state filing requirements. We'll work our way through the rest of the states in future episodes. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. In today's episode, we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Wisconsin and Minnesota. For the details on these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular, charities that are exempt under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, Joe worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. Welcome back to the show, Joe.
Welcome. It's good to be here.
Let's go with our current states for today, Wisconsin and Minnesota. And starting with Wisconsin, how do we form our nonprofit organization as a Wisconsin corporation?
For sure. So in Wisconsin, unlike a lot of the states, it's not the Secretary of State. It's their Department of Financial Institutions that governs entity formation. Nomenclature is a little different from most states as well. For domestic nonprofit corporations, they have a 2-page form number 102, which is Articles of Incorporation for a non-stock corporation. While this can be filled out online and submitted or populated and signed, we'll discuss some concerns with that. As always, though, it asks for your basics, your name, your registered agent. But let's go step by step on some of the unique items here in the form. Article 3 is the naming of the registered agent. Interestingly, it specifically notes that the entity itself cannot be its agent. We would usually advise an individual is at the nonprofit and not the nonprofit itself anyway, or using a professional service, which we talk about. So that's not different per se. We wouldn't necessarily have the company itself be that. It would be an individual there, but it's interesting that they've called that out.
Okay. Yeah, that is different.
Article 7 asks whether or not you will have members, which we see on a lot of these forms. Article 8 is to mark whether the corporation is authorized to make distributions under 181.13024 of the Wisconsin statutes. This portion of the statute refers specifically to dissolutions of the corporation, and really you should have reviewed by local Wisconsin council to see whether this applies in your instance. It sets up how that dissolution is separate from what we do when we talk about the IRS dissolutions. This is very state specific. As always, state law matters. It's gonna catch you too. Article 9 notes name and address of the incorporator. Article 10 is optional. It allows you to attach further provisions on an additional page with labeling Article 10, Article 11, and so forth in a sequential order. For the instructions notes that are appended to the form, this includes identifying the names and addresses of individuals who serve as the directors, identifying the purpose or purposes for which the corporation was organized, and specifying again how assets will be distributed on dissolution, defining, limiting, and regulating other powers of the corporation and its directors. This is where we would include our Internal Revenue 501c3 language, obviously. Also, if the document is executed in Wisconsin per 182.01 of the Wisconsin statute, it requires that it includes the name of the drafter of the document. If it's not executed in Wisconsin, you just indicate that it's in the space provided for the drafter's name that it was done out of state. So that's kind of interesting.
Very different.
Yeah.
So let's say our nonprofit's organized in another state but is doing business in Wisconsin. How do we get our foreign nonprofit corporation qualified and registered in the state?
For sure. So here, Wisconsin has their form number 121, which is an application for certificate of authority for foreign non-stock corporations. It's 3-page. It's also very straightforward. At the bottom, it states this form is mandatory, so there's no deviation for the registration we talk about here in California, where we just print out a document and we put it in a Word document that follows the lines. Here, you can't do that in Wisconsin. It has the basics from what we see in most foreign registrations: the name, where they were formed, the address, a registered agent there in Wisconsin. Section 5 does ask if the corporation has perpetual existence in its home state. Some of the caveats on registered agent, as noted, are the same in the domestic. Section 10 asks if the corporation transacted business in Wisconsin prior to submitting the application. And if the answer is yes, there's an additional document and fees attached for the application. Section 11 asks for the principal officers and their usual business or home address. So we talk about this. It can be either or there. Note that this list includes not just president, secretary, and treasurer, but also any vice president. So this is a little more robust than a lot of them we see, where it's usually only the top 3. Section 12 asks the same for all the directors, their usual business or home address. And then Section 13 is a member, no members question. And yes, a current home state certificate of status, certificate of good standing must be included with this filing.
Okay, well, that's a lot of information in a foreign registration. Before drilling down into that a little bit, let's talk about the cost and how quickly we can get one of these filed.
For sure. So the filing fee is $35 for the domestic and $100 for the foreign application. And per the Wisconsin website last week, the second week of January 2025, most online filings will be accepted upon receipt. For over-the-counter mailed-in filings, their ETA is 10 business days. And for an additional $25, there is a 24-hour expedite.
But if you do it online, it's going to be pretty quick anyway.
Yes, correct. You wouldn't necessarily want to worry about that $25.
All right. And what about annual filings? Does Wisconsin require any annual updates for the organization?
Yes, they do have annual filings, but here in Wisconsin, the timing for annual filings is different for the domestic and the foreign. Domestics are based on the quarter where you were incorporated. So if you form January 1 to March 31st, your report is due that March 31st. Then if you form from April 1st through June 30th, it's that June 30th. If you form July 1st through September 30th, again, it's that last date, the September 30th. And then, of course, the same final quarter, October to December, and you get a December 31st. So today, if we form today in Wisconsin, we're recording today, actually January 23rd, then our first report would be due March 31st, 2026. And if your foreign nonprofit is registered, theirs is always due March 31st, irrespective of that registration date. So it's much simpler that way. The same form is used for both the annual reports for both the domestic and the foreign, and even for the LLCs. And here you will need to give the name and business addresses of all the directors and the principal officers again. Copies of all these forms are in the show links, the application, the articles, and the annual reports. Annual fees, I assume, are associated with these annual reports? That is correct. So it's $25 for the domestic and $80 for your foreign. And same thing, you can have the $25 expedite here as well if you feel the need. But again, we would recommend, as we just talked about when we're in South Dakota, filing these online, which is almost instantaneous. So yeah, and so the likelihood of expediting would be rare. So backing up a little bit, as you were talking about the original foreign registration, and I think the same information was included in the initial filing for the domestic nonprofit corporation, it looks like they asked for a lot of details about all the directors and officers. Yes, that is correct. With the foreign nonprofit, all the officers, including, like we said, of the vice presidents, not just your top 3, must be named immediately in the registration. If you're domestic, you don't have to name them then, but by the time it gets to the annual report, yes, all of your officers and all of your directors need to be named, and they need to have a business address at a minimum attached to them. Well, that's interesting. That's a lot of detail. That's just the requirement in the state of Wisconsin to make all that public information, and hopefully you have business addresses so you don't need to use home addresses, which always concerns me. So let's talk a little bit about other state agencies. Does the nonprofit need to register with anyone else besides the Department of I guess it's DFI, Department of Financial Institutions? Who else do we register with in Wisconsin? So yes, so in Wisconsin, if you're organized there or you're a foreign nonprofit that solicits, holds assets, or does business there in Wisconsin, you are required to file an additional registration with with that same Department of Financial Institutions, but with their Charitable and Professional Organizations Division. Here we can note, too, as always, when we check in, the form website highlights that as of March 2024, they have different financial reporting for nonprofits depending on whether your financial year ended on or after March 23rd, 2024. So they have a multiplicity of forms on there right now. Registration is, as we don't talk as much about the charitable registrations, but it's going to ask for, your IRS determination letter. It's going to ask for some manner of your financials, how you've done that. Again, not too different from what you have in your IRS 1023. A lot of that can be copied over into here. And then also for tax exemptions, you can go through the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. Nonprofits can specifically apply for a certificate of exempt status, the CES, and a link to the FAQ for the CES and all the other Wisconsin websites can be found in the show notes. I'm also going to link to a guide from Marquette University there in Wisconsin, which has a great step-by-step forming and keeping your Wisconsin nonprofit up to date.
Oh, that's a great resource. Thanks for tracking that down. That'll be a good one to see in the show notes. So that covers Wisconsin. Let's move on to sister state, Minnesota. What do we do to file our nonprofit as a Minnesota corporation? And then we'll talk about the foreign entity that qualifies to do business there.
For sure. So here we're back to a Secretary of State in Minnesota. That's our governing entity. The state here has a 3-page form that's just no number to it, just articles of incorporation, domestic nonprofit corporation. While we have the usual, the name, address, and registered agent, the instructions with the form specifically note, quote, a nonprofit corporation that wishes to apply for tax-exempt status 501c3 to the Internal Revenues should not use this form for its articles due to the fact that the IRS has additional language requirements. So
okay, well,
it's like, so we have a form, but don't use it. It's, again, this is sort of like California where where we put it into a Word document and we add stuff. The instructions list an exemplar from the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits as well. And it took me a minute. The link on the Minnesota Secretary of State website is a broken link, but I did trace down the link separately with the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. So it's attached in our show notes as well as the forms FAQ. So you can they have very good information on them. Final note, the incorporator needs to be named with their address when you file this as well. So for instance, we often use you in Delaware, so it would have to have your name and our address as the incorporator there on this one if we did it there. And then for a foreign nonprofit, it's the foreign corporation or cooperative certificate of authority to transact business is what's filed. This is one of those generic to all corporations, nonprofit, and professional forms. It's also 3 pages, our basics, name, address, registered agent, home state. Section 5 is the checkbox for a nonprofit, and it needs to be signed by an officer or an authorized agent. Note, both forms have an optional Minnesota business snapshot fill in at the end of these forms that asks about whether you have Minnesotan employees, a female, minority, or veteran-owned entity, what your NAICS codes are, and even your gross revenue. But it is all optional and voluntary. They like to, but you'll see that even as we go down, it's even on the annual report. They ask you this every year. So Minnesota likes to know what you're doing.
That's interesting. When I first heard you, I thought it was Snapchat, and I was like, wow, that's new. If you have to use Snapchat in Minnesota. No. Okay, but they do have a snapshot.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's worthwhile that states try to keep track of some of these details. That can be really helpful for, keeping track of what's going on in the state at a kind of global and informational level. So how about timing for filings? Can we get a Minnesota entity created quickly?
Yeah, so per their website, online filings are automatically deemed expedited and returned electronically within 3 to 5 business days. Counterfilings are processed expedited while the customer waits. So if you want to actually spend some time in Minnesota and go to the Secretary of State, you'll get your documents even faster than if you did it online. If you leave it, that's the mailed in ones. It was about several weeks.
Well, that's interesting. So this one's kind of counter to the trend we're seeing where online is the fastest.
Yeah.
And in person can be the slowest. But here it's...
As you show up, wait in line. As soon as you wait in line, they'll stamp it for you and put you in the system. So
that's interesting.
If you live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, you can go to the Secretary of State's office.
If you want to go out and brave the cold. Yes. I would do it online personally most of the year. Cost and annual filings.
The cost in Minnesota for the domestic articles, it's $90 if you do it online and the in-person expedited, and then it's $70 if you mail it in. So it's $20 cheaper.
Yeah, that explains why you might mail it in. You have to wait, but you'll save $20.
Yes. And then the foreign nonprofit certificate is $70 online and the in-person expedited, and then $50 for the mail. For an annual filing, irrespective of when you were formed and irrespective of whether you're domestic or foreign, it's due December 31st, the end of the year. So,
well, that's fun.
Yeah, that's
a great thing to think about in December.
Yeah.
Well, at least it's an easy date to remember.
And the fees there for a domestic one is actually $0. There's no fee for that. But if it's foreign, it's $135 for the expedited service or the online, and $115 if you submit it by mail. So I think the only comparable we've seen where it was this expensive was probably Florida, where there's a higher markup for being an out of state. There's always a little bit more, but this is one where it's a lot.
Quite a lot. Yeah.
It's literally 135% more.
Yeah, that's a lot. Privacy, how much detail do we have to make public for our Minnesota corporation with their Secretary of State?
So Minnesota is actually very opaque. President and his business address need to be named as in the annual reports, and should be then your signatory. But there's no obligation to name anyone else, none of your directors, none of your other officers.
Interesting. Okay. Any other state agencies governing our nonprofits in Minnesota?
Yeah. So in Minnesota, again, if you're organized there or you're the foreign soliciting or you hold assets or do business, you're required to file an additional registration with their Attorney General's office, the Charities Division, and then file an annual report thereafter. And the same thing, their Department of Revenue governs all tax exemptions. They have an application for exempt status, again, much like what we saw in Wisconsin. It's a fairly overbroad, covers your sales and use tax both. And as always, links to all these and the relevant documents and departments are in the show notes.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Joe. With that, we can wrap up this episode. As Joe mentioned, be sure to check out the show notes for links to resources in Wisconsin and Minnesota and links to the earlier episodes for the states that we have already covered. And be sure to check into updated laws, as we mentioned at the outset, before filing or starting your process, whatever states you need to be registered in. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Farella, Braun & Martel has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists, including the one we're building where all the state filing episodes are in one place. So look for that link in the show notes as well. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.